I was bullied as a child. The reasons people disliked me enough to abuse me included because I was born, because I was cute, because I was precocious, because I was talkative, because I was assertive, and because they just didn't like me. As I aged, and people started to realize I was transgender because as an autistic person, I didn't keep it to myself. They bullied me for that too. Mostly they bullied me because I wasn't just like them. Um, which is interesting because it was the 60s and 70s when diversity was being celebrated, but for some reason, children were still expected to turn into little robots. But then, after all, that's the purpose of the education system on the whole. So, the adults in my life, pretty much. Yeah, so the adults in my life pretty much were, well, the parents hated me because I was born. Um, Third child thing. Like, where did you come from? Why did you have to show up? Oh my God, now we have a fifth wheel. And I know this because they told me frequently for 17 years, because that's when I left. Now, as a child, I was female, so the bullying did not take the form of physical abuse. The parents, it was vaguely controlled. But like at school, the other kids didn't very often get physical. When they did, also, I went berserk and became 10 times as strong and absolutely unconcerned about how much harm I might do. And so, the kid starts picking up desks, you back off. I found a few ways of pitching a large enough fit to scare the other kids to get them to stop picking at my hair or picking up, grabbing my things, or the beginning physical assaults that might eventually lead to a scuffle if I fight back. But I never fought back, you see, because I was a pacifist. I had a temper, sure, but it was always defensive and as little of violence as I could possibly inflict. And then afterwards, I'd sit and feel bad about scaring those poor kids because I was not a normal child. You've got to understand that. I was capable of third person thinking from a very young age. I was capable of, I forget the word for that, where you sit outside of your own feelings and observe a situation in a universal point of view, trying to understand the feelings of the people involved. And I was capable of this right away in life, long before children are supposed to be able to. And so it helped me quite a bit to avoid the physical violence. But the psychological abuse, if anything, it got turned up because I was smart, because I wasn't cracking. Yeah, I was, it was too hard to crack me. And when you did crack me, it was after doing something so egregious that the adults might have to step in, or child protective services might have to step in, or the principal might be called, or whomever it was, because it was teachers. And I mean, when the principal was called, the principal's approach was always, listen, if I keep having you in my office, I'm going to hit you with the strap. So don't think I was getting compassion when he was called in. I occasionally had teachers that didn't hate me. They would treat me with compassion. And those were lights in my life. But now I'm meeting a lot of people who did in fact get physically assaulted on a regular basis. And at first thought, I think, oh, that's so much worse than what I went through. Ooh, to have a fist hit you in the face. Ooh. But I'm starting to realize that it did a lot more shaping to me than it does to them. We're all injured and wounded warriors, don't get me wrong. But I seem to be more deeply wounded and more deeply affected by the abuse that I experienced. Such that in a lot of ways I've come out the other side. And I can just sit there and take an enormous amount of emotion from someone without taking it on, without taking it personally. And that's the other side, as I'm talking about. And I see these people and I realize that when they physically abuse you, they're good for a while. They're done. They hurt you, and they don't only just make you cry, but they actually can see the evidence of the harm they've done, and maybe even they feel bad about it because they can see that they've harmed you. But when they psychologically hurt you and you hide it, because that's part of your defense strategy, never let them see you sweat, never show your fear, don't let them know they're getting to you. It's one of the, because, well, that's what the adults tell you to do. If they don't know they're getting to you, they'll get bored, you're told. But what actually happens is they get more maniacal. It's a 24/7. It's not a after school we're going to get you. It's constantly. It's with the teacher looking on during class. It's around the adults. It's always happening at all times unless I'm alone. And I think for kids who got the physical bullying, it was more intermittent and there were periods of rest. And I just think that's interesting. I'm just having, I've been triggering myself this whole conversation. I'm having a hard time controlling my feelings. I'm sure you can read it on my face. It's been the sort of thing you try not to think about because you'll never stop grieving. You don't stop grieving that kind of history. It's not possible for me to talk about myself and share stories in a normal way because all of my stories have a hook. And it's funny to me, but it's not funny to anyone else. They're just like, oh my God. And then I feel bad because I was making a joke and I didn't understand because that was my normal. And you can even understand that your normal was abnormal without understanding. And there's no moral lesson to be given. It's just story time. Psychological abuse of a child is actually worse